Hello and welcome to Imperial Enterprise Lab's How to Talk series. My name is Ewan Bell. I am the Entrepreneurship Support Officer in the lab. And for those of you who are unsure, the Imperial Enterprise Lab supports the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs at Imperial College London. So usually we do this through events and co-working space, competitions and one-to-one support. However, given the situation we're in, this has all moved online. So if you want to find out a bit more about what we're doing, please visit our website, www.imperialenterpriselab.com. You can also contact us there. So if you've got any suggestions about how we can be better supporting you virtually, then please do get in touch and let us know. So if this is your first time attending one of our talks, the How To Talks is a 6-week series. It's a great entry point if you want to learn and build your knowledge of the skills you need to be entrepreneurial. We invite experts from every corner of the startup world and beyond to help give you a more rounded view of what the road to success looks like. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Olivia Ahn delivering our talk today. Olivia is the CEO and co-founder of Planera. So Olivia founded Planera as a result of mounting frustration with companies forcing the burden of waste onto us as individuals. She believes that a well-designed product should be intuitively simple to use and to dispose in a sustainable manner. Here, the flushable and biodegradable sanitary pad was born, and 3 years of research and development later, Planera has launched the world's first and only certified flushable and 100% biodegradable sanitary pad. Planera's pads have a similar impact to toilet paper and give back the guilt-free choice and freedom to the consumer. Planera will be bringing a range of personal hygiene products to the market from 2021. Olivia, along with her co-founder Aaron, is an alumni of Imperial College London, and they started Planera in the penultimate year of their Bachelor of Medicine degree. So the format for the session today is going to be a short presentation from Olivia, and it's going to be followed by a Q&A. So if you've got any questions for her, please put it in the chat or the Q&A function throughout the presentation, and we will get to as many of these questions as we can. So without much further ado, I would like to hand over to Olivia.
Hi everyone, I'm just going to share my screen. All good? Right, yeah. Wonderful. I'm just going to get up the chat box. So hi everyone, thank you so much for coming in. As Ewan very kindly introduced, I'm not an expert, I am an early stage founder, but I'd like to take this opportunity to chat through my experiences of building a consumer product startup, the steps that went through and the other sort of considerations and the sort of steps that I've learned. And if I had to do it again, the way that I would do it. Ewan has given a very great sort of overview. I thought I'd just sort of talk about what my background is within startup and the journey through it. It could help structure any sort of questions that you have which are specific to that. Bearing in mind that Planera itself is a deep stack consumer product company. So what that means is that we handle everything from the manufacturing, production, shipment, building a consumer brand, as well as protecting our IP around that. So rather than, for example, converting another type of product or purchasing from an external manufacturer, that's the kind of product that we've built and the company that we've chosen to build around it. So that's the sort of framework that my experience has come from. So Planera is a personal hygiene company, making it easier to live sustainably. And we launched the world's first certified flushable and biodegradable sanitary pad last year. So a quick overview, and I sort of brought out the 5 sort of main milestones that I think are relevant to this. So first of all, we were registered in June 2017. So just over 3 years ago. And as Ewan said, I was studying medicine and Aaron was doing his master's in biomedical and design engineering. And we started by entering the Imperial We Innovate competition. We're very fortunate to win it, but essentially that kicked it off. It gave us that initial capital. It gave us the motivation to start a company. We spent the next 2 years essentially validating that minimum viable product, that MVP. So by that, I mean, what is the sort of first prototype that will prove that your product works and is possible to make into a company? As part of that journey, the original idea that we pitched for Imperial We Innovate, we ended up pivoting away from. We started off with just a 100% biodegradable sanitary pad as an insert into pants. However, we realized that we wanted to make that process of disposal easier, so we ended up pivoting with that founding insight that disposable products have not been designed for disposal. So making it flushable was bringing a new sort of step change to the current products in the market. At this point in our journey, our priority, because we had very little capital, was ensuring that we kept as much value that would bring like additional value to our company. So that in itself was the IP. So we kept all of our R&D and all of that development internal. So that was myself and Aaron. All of the external testing we did with an Indian lab. We did that so that we could keep costs as low as we can. However, the downside of that, it took us 2 years because the time it takes for us to write a set of procedures, agree them with a lab in India to get them tested, get the report back was obviously very time intensive. However, this did allow us to create valuable IP, and we submitted our UK patent application at the end of 2019. At this point, we felt like we had a product that we were confident in. So that's when we raised our first round of funding, almost 3 years in. So that's when we were joined by UK as well as a Hong Kong VC, as well as a range of family offices and angels. I'll be talking about investment slightly more, but just a little snapshot of our sort of cap table at that point. At that point, our priority had switched. We needed speed and we needed to validate our product and the market further. So that's when we brought everything in-house. That's why we raised the money, because we realized that we needed to take this product to market as soon as possible to make sure that we increased our defensibility and made sure that other players in the market knew that we existed. And because we were building up such a deep stack, we knew that we needed to really make sure that our manufacturing processes were all really sort of robust and validated. At that point, we expanded our patent application into an international PCT into over 150 countries. And then in November of last year, that's when we launched. So we were awarded the flushability certification. That was awarded in the middle of lockdown. I believe it was August, one of the lockdowns. And then we launched on the 1st of November. We were very fortunate. We were overwhelmed with a really great demand. So we sold out over 8 months of boxes in less than 72 hours. And we have a rapidly growing waiting list because we are still increasing our production capacity. So we have a waiting list of over 10,000 people, and it's still growing within our Planera community. So at this point, we realized, our priority is still speed and validation, but we need more speed and we need more validation. So that's when because obviously COVID happened, 2020 happened, as it happened to everyone. So that's when we wanted to do what we call an ASA note. It's a type of funding that essentially gets you money quickly, but essentially you don't have to set a valuation at that point. We set the valuation at a second point. I'm happy to talk about the sort of specifics around structuring a funding round in the Q&A session, but I'm conscious to keep this quite broad. So at that point, we wanted to bring in international and seed strategic investors. So people who had follow-up money, as well as people who could help us do global expansion. Because obviously, whilst now we're looking at UK expansion, we're thinking about a global sort of reach. And along with that money, we are increasing our production and currently validating our product market fit. So a sort of snapshot into where Planera is and our sort of journey to this point. The topics that I thought would be relevant to cover is, the practicalities of actually getting started. So the sort of toolkit that you need before, as well as the sort of 6 steps that you need in actually having a legally registered company, as well as the sort of 5 sort of main topics that I consider very, very important when you're considering about setting up a startup. And then finally wrapping up with the sort of tips for your first 12 months from day one. By the way, if you have any questions, I've got the chat box up. So if you have any questions, put them through, and if I can, I will try and include it into the presentation as I go. So the toolkit for getting started is, I think, fairly broad because the things that you need is, I think you need a problem. You need a problem that you need to solve, and whether you have a solution or whether you have a mission is sort of secondary to that. If you have a solution and you have a mission with it, then that's wonderful, but all you really need is a problem. And I think falling in love with that problem and understanding it and not having a bias towards the solution that you initially may come up with is a very important thing that I've learned within the first year, because that's a trick that I fell into. I really fell in love with my solution, that initial biodegradable pad. And really, it's took myself and Aaron about 12 months to really break down whether that would solve the problem and how much impact and quantifying that impact that would have. The second thing is people. And I think this is one of the most important things that you can have when you get started, because you need a sounding board. And having, whether if you're a sole founder, I think this is extremely important. And if you're in a team of founders, making sure that you are in nothing is more important than, I would say, than that relationship with you and your co-founder, because there needs to be that inherent trust that both of you are working towards the same mission. Because myself and Aaron know that we will have differing opinions. We will come to it, and sometimes we may or may not like the ideas that we both bring to the table. We both understand and respect the fact that we are both equally as passionate and motivated about getting to that final point. And it is a very difficult relationship, because you will go through highs of, things go well, and that's amazing, but there will be times of extreme stress, and making sure that you have people around you who will be able to take you through that is very, very important, and is not a decision to be taken lightly. And then money as well. Money is important, because obviously you need to fund things. My experience of it is extremely limited in needing a lot of money straight up, because my product is a sanitary pad. So I initially bought materials from Alibaba and Amazon, used an ironing board, and literally made the first sort of few products in our bedroom. I understand that if you are doing a software, or for example, like a med tech or other things which are much more sort of capital intensive, this here you could look at sort of more free money types like grants or R&D funding, which the government has put a lot of sort of money towards and push towards. I see a question here about tips for solo founders too, with respect to finding initial people. There are lots and lots of resources out there for solo founders. I personally have never started off this as a solo founder, so I don't have a personal experience to share with you. I know lots of solo founders who have used resources like Founders Factory to essentially bring together, or Entrepreneur First. There's loads of these sort of resources that essentially either bring, you either be a founder or you have a problem, and they essentially create that sort of founding group within it. So there's lots of different sort of approaches to that. If you have a specific question, and I realize I haven't answered that particularly well, I'd be happy to sort of answer any questions. Or I do have friends within that community who have worked on the sort of agency side, for example, in Entrepreneur First or Founders Factory, who may be able to give some more insight into the way that solo founders work in starting up their own startup. And the skills that you need. So learning from mistakes is, I think, the number one sort of, another platform. So which platforms would you say are best to receive grants or seed funding? I'm going to keep that question for my fundraising slide, because I think that's a great question. So the skills that you need, learning from mistakes and adaptability, because when I first started off, I thought that being an entrepreneur meant that you made a business plan and you stuck to it, which I believe now is very naive, because everything that you do is testing and iteration. I think until now, every single document is still live. We are constantly going back, and there's a time frame of review, whether it's a 6-month review, whether it's a 5-year review for your vision statement, or whether it's a monthly review for your company's like key metrics. There's always an iterative process, because you will go stale if you don't. And that's something that I think is the mindset that I came in with coming from medicine. I always felt like, there's a gold standard. What is the guideline telling me to do? And what is the best practice for this going forward? But something that I had to learn within the first sort of 2 years was that there is no real practice. And that goes for all the advice that I'm giving you and all the things that I'm sort of saying at this point, because this is all from my personal experience, which there is no right way to going about making a successful company, but it's finding a way that works for you as well. And then I think the most important thing, particularly for mental health, the most important thing, especially for mental health, is keeping in mind your own yardstick, because everyone, including your investors, your co-founder, your teammates, everyone will have a different meaning of what success and failure means to them. And because for example, for me, my success that I wanted to make sure that I achieved with Planera was I wanted to create a positive impact with a large group of people. And that to me, that success has also, that definition of success has also changed, because in the first 2 years, I thought, I want a mass market product. I want something there that will change the industry, that will remove single-use plastics from a stagnant industry. That's what I want to do. But in the last year or so, I've realized that, you know, the more sort of local partnerships, I gained so much satisfaction from my founding employees, from my partnerships, my suppliers, because I can see the measurable impact there, but it's still within that success. Because for failure for me is building a company that looks exactly like the same of the P&Gs, the Unilevers, the companies that are unsustainable and are creating waste in our society. And that to me is failure. And making sure that every time you have a difficult time, this yardstick is something that you come back to, because I think doing a startup is as much of a mental marathon as it is a sort of physical and academic one. Okay. Thank you. I see a couple of questions. I see a question around what level of prototypes needs to be taken to a sort of startup incubator. I'll address that because I've got a product and slide coming up, so I'll keep that question in mind. But thank you. I'll make sure I remember that. So the practicalities of registration. Essentially, I've put up 6 easy steps. The website is up there, the gov.uk. The UK government website is extremely clear in how the different steps are, but I just wanted to pick out 6 different points that I think are worth mentioning along the way. So the first one is, what kind of company do you need to register? Usually it would be a limited company, limited by shares. And that's the one that I have, and I think most startups in this field will have, unless you're going into something that is non-for-profit or anything else like that. The second point is, when you're choosing your company name, I would consider, if you're doing something that is consumer-facing, like Planera, consider having a company name that is different from your trading name. So for example, when we registered, we are called Symbioco. The reason we chose that name is because we knew we needed to do months of market testing, research, iteration to really find a brand that fit with the early adopters that we were going to be pitching this product to. But we didn't have the time to do all of that before we registered the company, because we wanted to register the company as soon as possible. I see a question here. At what point will you be ready for registration? It really depends on what you want to do with the company. For us, we needed to register because we wanted to start getting government grants, government funding, and we wanted to also set up a legal entity that we could start operating under. So it was for us, it was a very sort of immediate decision. And also because the steps are not very difficult, it was not, because it costs you £12 to register a company. So for us, it wasn't that much of a step for us to do it. Plus, it makes it easier if you apply for competitions, because that's a lot of what we were doing, is applying for free money at the first sort of year. And if you have, say, that you've registered, it shows much more intent, and that just worked for us in that way. So that's why we chose to register. So thanks for that question. The third point around deciding on your persons with significant control. If you're not a sole founder, there's some really interesting statistics out there around the companies that succeed are usually companies that have founders with different equity amounts. And that's not because you need different equity amounts for a company to succeed, but because those founders have had that difficult conversation about what is the value and the risk of them coming and joining the company. For me and Aaron, we do not share the same amount of equity, because Aaron went full-time in the first 2 years, taking much more of the risk early on. I worked as a junior doctor in the NHS for a couple of years full-time. I worked as much as I could, but obviously there's no way that I can compare to that amount of dedication that Aaron did for the first 2 years as well. So I think whether or not you decide to end up with whatever sort of equity amount that you're happy with, I think it is very, very important to have an honest and frank discussion about the equity, because you don't want that discussion to come up and rear its head if the company goes through a difficult time, and if there's any sort of frustration that has been left by either one of the founders, then that's going to make a very difficult time for you. So that's something that I would very heavily recommend. The fourth thing is more of a tick step, where you have to prepare 2 legal documents: the Memorandum of Association and the Articles of Association. Essentially just meaning that the memorandum is you and the important stakeholders agree that you are going to form a company, and the Articles of Association are essentially the rules that you are agreeing to run this company by. You can get plenty of templates of them for free on sites like Seed Legals, I will go through that in our legal in our legal slide, but I think these are just sort of easy tick steps that you can do. And then the fifth step is making sure that you start off as you mean to go on. You need formal documentation for the company because you can get fined. So if you don't hold 6 years of your accounting for the last, so if you start, you have to keep those accounts for up to the next 6 years. Otherwise, HMLC can fine you, as well as keeping all records of significant decision making and decision makers. So all board meetings, any sort of key meetings that happen between important stakeholders in your company, you should keep documentation of. And by that, we started off by a Word document and just making sure you just save that and just remember to do that. And then the final step is the registration with Companies House. It costs £12, do it on a website. It's confirmed in less than 24 hours. It's very, very simple to do. Okay, I see another question about how did you come to the conclusion about equity? When should we make that decision in early stage when we haven't worked together for that long yet? That's a very good question. When did Aaron and I talk about it? I think we talked about it very early on. So Aaron and I had the idea, entered the competition in We Innovate. That it was before my finals. I'm struggling on my time frame, but I know that we did the competition first, then we registered the company in June 2017. We had the discussion of equity before we registered. So it must have happened at some time after the competition and before registration. I may not remember when it happened, but I remember us taking several goes at it. And if you don't know someone very well, there are some very, very good tools online. And this is something that you could start now. For example, you could bring in a mediator. That could be something where if you don't know each other both very well and you want to make sure that you both have a fair and respectful conversation where both of your voices are heard, that could be a simple way, bringing in a third party, or just making sure both of you have a template that you agree upon before you both write something down, you bring something to it. So I would say trying keeping emotions out of it whilst it's difficult would be the way that I would go. I'm not saying ignore your emotions because that's important. How you feel about a decision is obviously very important, but when you're talking about it, it can be a little bit obstructive if both of you are obviously very passionate about it. I don't think I've given that a very good answer, but I'll have a think about it and I can answer that question again at the end if you think that needs more. I'll sort of go to the next slide around legal. So registering, so the first sort of 4 points are the reasons why I think you should take legal quite seriously in the first sort of instance. The reason I put it first is because for me, it was very important. It was a top priority within Planera. Number one is registering your startup. That was more of a technical step. The second point was protecting where we believed most of our value would lie, because we know that sanitary pads are low cost, low margin products. We are not going to make £1 billion or whatever kind of company by just selling products. We have to be able to make something more than that. So that's where we knew that we have a new way of manufacturing products. We have another new type of product altogether. So we need this IP to protect. If you have something like that, then I would suggest talking to as many people as you can, get as many different opinions, advice from more sort of, I would say even from lawyers, from previous entrepreneurs, from anyone within your industry network, because especially for me, a femcare industry was something that I was extremely unfamiliar with, apart from as a consumer. So we needed to do at least, 6 months, 12 months of research before, we understood about the sort of significant players and the sort of real IP that lies within it. The third thing is around the sort of regulatory overlap, because for us, sanitary products are sort of less regulated than medicines, for example, but if you're in pharma, if you're working in something that has a lot of sort of legal oversight, then that would be very crucial to make sure for the company's sort of protection and making sure that you create a product that is safe. And the sort of final thing is, for us at least at the beginning, we worked a lot with contractors and freelancers. So we needed NDAs, we needed contracts, short-term contracts, we needed those kinds of things. So that's where sort of the legal played a role. because before we brought in founding employees, we wanted to work with as many different kind of people, understanding what would be the best way to grow our team as well. I see a question around the approach to IP strategy. I've got a separate slide on IP, so I'll come back to that question there. Thanks. And then I put up here, I cannot recommend Seed Legals enough. It is a service that we have used for the last 3 years, and it is extremely low cost for the immediate sort of service that you get within legal advice. We currently have at the bottom, you see in the greens, those that's the reference of what we currently use. So we use Seed Legals. We also have IP specific lawyers. We have corporate counsel as well as M&A lawyers, so merger and acquisition. The reason why we separated it out is obviously we need each of these lawyers for different things. But starting off with Seed Legals for your first year was pretty much all you need. As soon as you start going into IP, then I would definitely recommend getting an IP lawyer. Do not enter any sort of patent discussions with, you know, a low-cost service, because there's nothing more expensive than a cheap lawyer. But Seed Legals gives you really good templates. It gives you the founders agreement. It gives you the memorandums of association. All of those sort of general things to get your company going is really, really useful. There are startup-focused lawyers, such as the examples I put there. We used introductions through our investors and other sort of people in our network. So that's why we didn't use them. There wasn't a particular reason why we didn't go down that route. Sorry, I realize that there are a lot of questions, and I'm going to apologize in advance because it is difficult to read and speak at the same time, but I'm going to try and sort of marry them all together in the same place. Accounts. So essentially the money and who handles it. For me, this was our second priority because neither Aaron or I came from a financial background. I'm a medic, he is an engineer, and so we needed people to help us with our money. The other reason why we needed accountants and people helping us with our sort of financial decisions is because we knew of the type of company that we were building. And that's why I put that question of what kind of businesses you're going to start to look like. Because we knew that we needed, we're very capital intensive. We needed a lot of free money, so competitions, grants, how we're going to structure that fundraising as well, whether we want to, whether we wanted to just go down the typical, you know, VC route, but actually because we've got a lot of capital, can we do other types of finance? This was extremely important questions that we didn't even know that we didn't know. Does that make sense? There was a lot of areas that we realized that we had no idea about. And that's why I put this as a second priority. If you are coming from a financial background and you feel quite comfortable with all of this, and this may be lower down on your list, but for me, this is why I've put it quite high up. The other reason why we needed accountants from very early on is before grant funding. We raised over £250,000 of free money. I don't think Horizon 2020 may be applicable after Brexit. But there are other sort of free grants, Innovate UK's, there's the monthly Shell, there's so much competitions floating around. Obviously, VCC, we innovate, but within the free money, I would say try and get it as much as you can, but this is extremely time intensive, and making sure that your accounts are all up to scratch to make sure that you can receive government funding is crucial. Another reason why we wanted accountants is because we are extremely R&D intensive, and this means that we get 14% of our R&D refunded, like given back to us by the government, which is huge. Oh, I see that Horizon 2020 is still applicable, which is great. So that's good. So yeah, I would suggest that you guys apply for that, as well as Innovate UK. There's loads of smart grants that have been brought out as well. But it's basically Innovate UK grants funding is all about R&D. I'm getting distracted. But anyway, back to the R&D tax credits. If you do feel like your company is extremely R&D intensive, definitely get someone who will be able to do that for you. And if you get accountants that can do it well, then obviously you get more stuff filed under R&D and get more of your tax back. Also, fundraising, you need to make sure that all of your accounts are in order for that, as well as if you start to do revenue generation. We are only just launched, so 3 and a bit years later, we've not got to that point, but I know that certain companies, you know, start generating revenue from the get-go. So that's why I'm putting it up there. There are startup focused accountants. We use one, they're called Square Mile Accounting, excellent. We've used them from the start. We pretty much got them as soon as we registered the company. I don't know of many other startups that got them as early as we did, but that's just because we wanted to make sure that we were on top of the ball with that. I'm going to move on to IP because I see a lot of questions around IP as well. I'm going to scroll up to make sure that I haven't forgotten it. Before I get talking about the sort of practicalities around it, I would caution you to consider the value in your entire supply chain. Because, for example, within the sanitary products, so if you look at a sanitary pad, the entire supply chain, that takes from growing the cotton or the wood pulp, the extraction of it, the manufacturing, the conversion, the production, the distribution, the disposal. Like there's so much value to be taken out of it, but really the people who make the most profit are the people who sell the product, the people who, create to sell the wood pulp or sell the sheets. They don't make the most amount of margin. So that's why for us, we felt there is a lot of value in protecting this IP, because for us, this is the most valuable part of this entire industry's supply chain. So if we do this, then we capitalize on the most important aspect of this product's journey. And so I would take that into consideration, because there are other aspects, other companies where you may have IP that is extremely valuable to your company, but in retrospect to the entire industry or that supply chain, it may not bring or add that much value, in which case, would that money be better spent in other areas that can bring other types of value to your company? That's something that I would just offer out there. The second thing is around the cost benefit ratio, because the benefit of an IP will only come in the very, very long term. There is some short-term IP, to be frank, where even saying you have a patent application when you're fundraising is good, but the value added to your fundraising purely just to say that is not worth it. There are other ways to add value to your IP, such as defensibility contracts, strategic partnerships. There are loads of other ways to ensure that your IP is defensible without having to go through a patent. So just consider, because it will be 5, 8, 10 years until that patent is awarded, and there may be challenges, and consider the other players in your industry who hold patents. For us, Kimberly-Clark, Reckitt Benckiser, we don't have the money to go up against that. So you have to be considerate about when were those patents filed, how many of those patents are being used in your current industry right now. Is there value to you just purchasing a patent? Is it valuable to you to do something else within this IP that is not necessarily you submitting your own patent? I realize I'm asking a lot of rhetorical questions, but I'll actually get to answering your questions, because I see because the application in other industries outside of your business model is something that I believe is something that is one of the reasons why Planera went for it. Because for us, our patent application, we submitted a UK patent application that was extremely broad. The reason we did that was because we didn't have the money to submit lots of different patents. And so when you submit a patent, you get a priority date. That priority date sets the fact of when that information has been put into the public realm. And you have 12 months from that priority date to amend your patent application. After those 12 months, you will then submit the patent, and the patent office will then come back to you with suggestions. And if they think that patent is too broad, they will recommend that you then break down the patent and submit it into, say, 3 or 4. But at least you've got all that information in a priority date, in public realm, filed with the patent office. So that's the reason why we chose to go for a patent in a UK patent early on. Also because in that patent application, we included the manufacturing process of the product, the actual layering of the product itself, as well as some of the other sort of ancillary things that go around it, because we full well knew that there were other things that we could expand on within that 12 months. So I think a lot of people may consider that, oh, I need a finished product before approaching a lawyer. You need to have an understanding of viability. So you can't just create a problem and be like, there has to be some sort of scientific evidence or reasoning as to why your product has a differentiable product and why it will also be feasible. But you do have 12 months to work on it. So that's something that we did. And we did that actually before Imperial's demo day, because we wanted to make sure that we had all of our information protected before we went out and showed the world. The application in other industries, for example, is the adhesive, the biodegradable adhesive. We wanted to put that out into, for example, packaging, recycling. There's loads of other industries that could be applicable, that patent can bring you great value, which may not be in your own industry. I think I spent a lot of time on the slide. Let me just see if there are questions. I see things coming in. Have you faced any other issues of companies launching competing products? That's a good question on the defensibility. No, we haven't. Partly because we had a 3-year head start. No one knew that we were working on a flushable pad until we filed the patent application date. We were working directly with the Water Research Centre who write the rules, as well as actually do the certification. So I know for a fact that no other products, no other companies have applied for that or even considered going for this. Partly because, and I think this is very specific to me, so I don't really want to spend too much time on it because I think it is very specific, but we know that there are certain materials that you need to develop in order to create this, and we've created defensibility around that. So we know that there are other ways to prevent other companies from going to market sooner than we want them to. In the end, for us, I think it's a wonderful idea to get more flushable products out there, because then you truly have to, because otherwise the consumer themselves won't get choice. Otherwise they'll just be one company that they can get flushable products from. And for us to really truly infiltrate the market, we need to make sure that we push out all of the other single-use plastic in the brands. I see a couple of other questions coming in around that. How do you know that no other big companies like P&G and Unilever will not create a similar product to compete with you? We don't. However, we engage with conversations with companies like J&J, Kimberly-Clark, P&G from the start. They approached us because there are third-party companies that work on behalf of these large corporates, because these large corporates are desperate for innovation. They, for example, ST Ventures, J&J Labs, they've all started their own innovation hubs, but because of the organizational structure of these, like the Hemoth legacy companies, they find it very, very difficult to break those sort of those structures down to bring innovation forward. Because, as I said, innovation is all about being adaptable, making sure that you change your business plan from one day to the next. And then you can't do that in such a large corporate like that. So they would either prefer to steal the IP from you, which is easy, or they can also buy the product off you. For us, we decided to work closely with them. We haven't given them any of our materials. We haven't given them any of our sort of IP. Instead, what they've done is we've agreed to have conversations about distribution, white labeling, other ways that they can essentially have access to the thing that they want. And I think something that's very important is whenever you enter a discussion with a large corporate or a legacy company like that, bearing in mind that the person that you're speaking to is going to be lovely, because you speak to like an R&D person or a sales person, because they themselves genuinely, they only work for the company. But remember that the company that you're dealing with is like a whole gear, and often the people that you talk to will not have the same sort of response as the company itself. So that's why we chose to work with them. We did a co-development grant with J&J. They paid for some of our development, and essentially don't give them what they need, which is your product or IP, but give them other ways to access it. But it is tricky. It is tricky. To be honest, I'm not an expert. We're still figuring it out. So the things that I have done, just to give it into perspective. Oh my goodness. So this is what we have done, is we have filed trademarks. We filed, sorry, my chat has been crazy. We filed the trademarks, we filed domestic and international patents, we filed a PCT, which is like a pause in 152 countries. It's a cheaper way of putting your date out there. And then it gives you 16 months to decide which of those countries you want to push those patents out in and design rights. So if you have any specific questions about that, I can answer them at the end. But I'm also conscious not to. I've been speaking for so long. Okay, right, I need to hurry up. And then regulations. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, Ewan. So regulations, I'll speed through this and then get to questions at the end. Does your product or service promote a positive change in the status quo? Does your product or service actively solve a current problem? I would say if you answer yes to either of those questions, then there's scope for you pushing new regulations within that. So for that, your intrinsic positive value should link to the profitability, which is great for your company because you are, by being profitable, you are creating good within the company. Just to put into perspective what we're doing. So within UK, EMEA, so it's Europe, Middle East and Africa, USA and Asia, we are working within the sort of sanitary product manufacturing and sale regulations. Within USA, Europe and UK, we are introducing flushable guidelines for non-white products because we are the first product that have been certified. So we are working with those people, as well as introduction of the single-use plastic regulation. For example, the banning of plastic straws. I want to introduce that for the banning of single-use plastic in sanitary products. This works as mainly for us. It's great because we're doing good, but it's a defensibility because if we stop the sale of single-use plastic sanitary products in the UK, then we are the only sanitary products that you can buy from. And therefore other sanitary brands will have to either white label from us or purchase our sort of manufacturing machines. And so there are different ways to sort of use regulations to support your business model. I'm speeding ahead to operations. This is the reason I put this last is because we only had our founding employees join us 4 months ago. So it's been myself and Aaron doing this for the last 3 years by ourselves. We did this because we wanted to keep the operational side of it very, very lean because the capital side is extremely intensive. We had to spend a lot of money on machinery, validating technology, and filing lots of IP and doing a lot of things that we felt were, we essentially wanted to make sure that by keeping the operations lean, we could show trust to our investors that we know how to spend the money to bring the most amount of value to the company. I'm not saying that team members will not add value. They are one of the most valuable investments that you can make. But at that moment in time, the most value addition would be us developing a product ourselves rather than hiring someone else to do it. So that's why we made that decision. I'm conscious that you guys have time to speak as well. So I'm going to get to the last slide around the tips for the first 12 months. So this is sort of iterating the toolkit that I said at the beginning. So understanding the problem that you're solving and shedding your own bias. So for us, when we moved from flushable, from biodegradable to flushable pads was really, and even now trying to remember that problem of disposable products have not been made for disposal, that is the problem that we're trying to solve, not creating a flushable pad. But that just happens to be the solution that we came up with. Testing and iteration is constant. Until now, we've made over 200 pad permutations. And it started with me and Aaron testing each of these pads. So Aaron wore a pad, I wore a pad, and now we have our community testing them. So we have hundreds of people testing these pads now, but that will never stop. I would say soft skills are equally as important as the accounts. So this is where I think we benefited a lot from because Aaron and I spent a lot of time learning, pitching, speaking to our community to get better at doing market research. Soft skills and within culture building, if you have a team, is going to be super important in keeping everyone motivated, happy, to working towards a mission. And yeah, that's something that if you feel that this is an area that you can improve on, or something that you don't feel that confident on, this is something that you can always improve and speak to. There's loads of mentors, especially within Imperial. I've used Janet and Eleanor, so definitely. Get as much free money as you can. So yeah, that includes grants, competitions, that includes tax returns, and consider all types of capital. I realize that I've spent a lot of time talking, but I'd be more than happy to answer any questions if you have specific ones in the Q&A around all of these different types of capital, all of these different, from VCs to family offices to loans to equipment financing to strategic partnerships. They will all look at your business in a different kind of way. A VC will look at hockey puck. Other kind of family businesses would want a different sort of growth trajectory. It depends on what sort of business you are and what sort of capital is right for you, rather than you being like, what sort of funding can I get? It's sort of like university, trying to think like what sort of uni course is right for you rather than what kind of university can I get into? Trying to switch that sort of mindset around. It took me a while to sort of get that. And then sort of lastly, but most importantly, mental health. I use Headspace, protected time, and I'm surrounded by plants. So I am going to wrap up and let you guys start asking questions and speaking.
Thank you very much, Olivia. That was fantastic. Yeah, so please send in all your questions, and we're going to try and get through as many of these as possible in the time remaining. We're going to have a speed Q&A, I think. So we've had a couple come in about the manufacturing and kind of your process of how did you find your manufacturer? I know you mentioned the lab in India. It's kind of the process of how you kind of made that arrangement.
Yeah, so they were not a manufacturer. They were literally a laboratory, like a laboratory that you get in like the science building. That was just for testing of the materials to find a flushable material at that point. For the manufacturer, we essentially Googled, rang. We ended up actually flying to Italy prior to COVID to try, visit. There's a place called Diaper Valley, which is full of sanitary pad manufacturers. Physically go to those places, talk to those people, get someone on a phone. Don't send an email if you can, because it takes so long to get any sort of response back. And with suppliers, if you're not someone who's willing to spend like several £1 million from the get-go and meet their minimum order quantities, they're not interested in a conversation. Whereas if you meet them and get on a call, it's difficult to say no to a voice.
You've gone right to the start of your presentation. You talked about the problem.
I'm going to stop.
Finding that problem. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about how you did find your problem and what drew you to that?
It was a very personal issue. So at that point, Aaron and I were housemates, and I was on my period. I literally asked him to pick up a pack of products, and he bought the whole shop pretty much. And then it was the first time I had to justify my period, because he was asking why, and it was the first time he'd ever really thought about it. Then there was I saw the adverts for what was then Althea, so for the We Innovate, and then it was pretty much like, let's see if we can make one better. And it was sort of, let's see how it goes. It wasn't the founding insight of disposal, which is where really the whole Planera came from, took a lot of digging into. It took us a good 6-12 months of questioning, talking to people, asking, because a lot of people don't think about it, and you have to really ask why and why and why, and it just takes a bit of time.
And in terms of speaking to people, you're talking about a product here that is the first of its kind, and how did you kind of balance that confidentiality and trying not to release as much information as you'd like, but also getting good feedback and finding out how what people think about it?
Sure. So for us, we wanted to test the flushable idea, but no one really believed it would work. So for us, that sort of played in our favor, because we would go to people like, we're trying to make a flushable pad, and people like, good luck. And no one really thought you could do it, because everyone was like, don't flush. And then we proved that flushable is more sustainable than binning it. And then people started to take notice. But going out, I think that question might be alluding to like the development with Johnson & Johnson, for example. You just have to be very careful about the language. I've never thought about every sentence as much as I do on those calls, because you can say, for example, how absorbent is it without talking about the specific testing protocol. You can talk about cellulose, which can mean to anything, which biodegradable doesn't mean, like, you can use these generic terms to describe the effect of your product or the impact of your product without talking about the actual thing itself. So that's something that I would recommend. But also, I mean, we have signed material transfer agreements, we've signed NDAs, but we know we don't have the money to protect that. J&J headquarters is Brazil. We can't go there. So we just have to be very careful.
Okay, looking at investment now, have you had any issues with the kind of investor founder fit in terms of, an investor that maybe wants to pull the company in one way when you want to keep it where it is? How do you kind of manage those relationships?
We were very careful about who we brought onto our cap table. So we are very fortunate. We don't have investors who do that, because for us, money is part of the conversation. And we would never take that conversation forward if we feel that there wasn't a culture fit. And that's something that we are very, very clear with our investors. And that's something that I think has to be two-way. So for us, we make sure that they know what their money has gone towards. Every single month, we give them a detailed breakdown, every single aspect of the company, every single department, where every single penny has gone and what that impact has done and the return on revenue of that. So then pretty much all of the investors really shouldn't, if they do have questions, they can, call me up, but they also, that's sort of the agreement that they're coming, is that they're investing in me as a founder and me as the company as an idea. They're not investing to take any sort of control of the company. And we do go to our investors for advice. We may or may not take it, but that's something that is, you have to be very strong on from the start. And I think certain types of investors may attract similar types of investors. So if you get a good egg on board, they bring other good eggs as well.
Yeah. And just to kind of go a little bit further into the funding aspect of things, I know you mentioned you're talking about free money earlier, and grants and competitions. Do you have any tips on where startups or individuals and teams can look for these kind of funds, and where they are available? It's a bit of a tricky, it's a bit of a big question, that.
It is. I was just thinking that because you have an expert in residence who I believed, so I was like, I would refer back to you, but I also, for me, it was all sustainability. So there are loads of sustainability funds, but also so I entered female competitions, you enter ethnic minority ones, sustainability, like social innovation, like there's different angles that if you can, that's why, I mean, for us, that it's very difficult because I'm trying to keep it broad, but because ours was so mission intertwined, it was very easy for us to sort of apply to those sorts of things. But I would consider different aspects and lenses in which you can view your company. And
at the start of your presentation, you spoke about the importance of your team and having people on board with you. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the kind of handling the team dynamics of yourself and Aaron, but also, and kind of going a little bit into sort of your co-founder agreements. How did you make it work at the start? It sounds like it was very, very quite intense. So really, it'd be good to hear some insights on that.
Yeah. Aaron and I approached it with the mindset that both of us had the company's best interests in mind. Sort of, I would say almost like a prenup, right? You're doing everything in case, like everything's right. And I would suggest have those agreements when you're both in a good place. Like don't have those agreements if you've had a fight or anything. You want to both approach it in a very sort of positive attitude and make sure that you come into it protecting their interests and they commit to it protecting yours. Because I think, because I'm trying to, me and Aaron had a very, I'll get to the end of the sentence, I promise. Me and Aaron approached it very sort of transparently, and we're very blunt with each other, but we don't take much offense. But I realize that that's very specific to personality wise. So I'm struggling a bit to answer that question, but I would say try and approach it when you're both in a good place, because you don't want to enter into such a stressful conversation, or an impactful conversation. It's an important one to have, and revisit it. We revisit it every 6 months. I'm not saying that you change it, but make sure that both of you are happy. And if you're both happy, then nothing changes and you're both in that same place and mindset. And I would say treat your founder relationship as any other metric. Try and Aaron and I are trying to implement that, but we're not quite there yet. But we want to be able to track how we feel around the trust, how we feel around the efficiency, because if you'll be able to track it, then you'll be able to improve it. And then there's a communication and a dialogue that you can both talk about. So that's, yeah.
We've had a couple of questions come in about customer discovery and how you can think about that. Obviously, we know how important that is at the start of your journey towards where you are just now. Are you able to, I know this is also another big question, but are you able to kind of touch upon a little bit how you did your customer discovery?
Yeah, we started off very biased, I realized, because we were in a university bubble. I asked all my Imperial friends, I asked my housemates. So again, London, like 18 to 25-year-olds, like a certain socioeconomic income, all that kind of stuff. And so that was very biased, but then then we sort of split into quantitative and qualitative. So you can pay Google surveys to do, 20 questions to a certain type of demographic, etc., and that will give you a certain set of data. It's not great, but you can also, then we did more qualitative, so focus groups. So we did that with Delta Poll. So they are like YouGov, so they do like all the government polling, but they do that for companies essentially. So if you've never run a focus group before, then I would suggest getting someone who knows what they're doing, because you can't lead someone on. The structure there needs to be a very specific sort of structure to it. So that's what we ask them to do, as well as now we are using our head of marketing and our community manager to run these through our trialists ourselves. So there's different step processes and there's different ways of doing it, but I would suggest that those are the sort of two basic ones to start off with.
Okay, great. We've had a question come in. It's actually quite an interesting question from one of our VCC teams, actually, who have asked, how important is speed when it comes to a startup like yours? So, is it you're trying to get the product done as quickly as you possibly can, or we'll take more time with it and we'll get it right?
That's a very good question. And I don't know if I have the answer to it, and I don't know whether we've done it right, because we'll see, right? It depends, I think, on the founder's appetite for risk.
Okay.
Because myself and Aaron wanted ourselves to be 100% sure that when we went out and took someone else's money, we knew that our product worked, because we didn't want to take that money and then turn around and be like, oh, sorry, we thought you had an idea. But that was just because I guess I wanted to see if it could be done. And I don't know whether that's different if it's a technology thing, whether that actually if I spend an X amount of time coding, I'm not a developer, but it's a different product. It depends on your product as well, and your appetite for risk. Until we got the flushable certification, the reason we waited until that point, and until that point, we wanted to obviously be the first to be certified, but really no one was in that space because no one thought it was a space. So that's why we had 3 years to make sure. I would say look at the sort of industry and the sort of development that it's in right now. I think if me and Aaron started it, then we'd have to really hurry up, because obviously someone else has had a certification, so we need to get out there. But for us, we had that sort of like that time, but now that we're out, it's all about speed. So it very much depends.
Okay, great.
It's not a great answer to hear. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. Okay, we're coming to the end here.
Yeah, I'm sorry I overspoke.
No, it was fantastic. Honestly, all the information in it was absolutely great. But just thinking about your presentation, you've covered a huge amount in it. Was there anything that you've kind of gone through that you were kind of surprised at, how either difficult it was, or it took longer than you, if looking back, is there something you would think, actually, I would have spent more time on, or, it could be IP or anything, but just, is there anything that stands out you thought, right, looking back on it, I would have spent longer on that?
As in specifically to the... No, I don't think so. I don't know if that comes off as arrogant. I don't think so. If my answer was actually going to go a different way. I was actually, if I could go back and spend more time on stuff, it would be on taking a break. Okay. Because burnout is real. I don't think that I would have... I don't think I've burnt out, but I came close. And when it is just you two in the company, you need to take care of yourselves, and that's something that I would say, rather than anything else in the company. Okay, great. Olivia, thank you very much for today. That was great. Thank you. Okay, just before we finish, everyone, I'm going to share my screen and yeah, so it would be great to get some feedback from you all on how you felt today's talk went. The code is up on the screen now, so if you can please visit menti.com and input when prompted 6250 525. That will bring you to our feedback form. It's a couple of questions long, it shouldn't take you very long to complete, but it's very useful for us to hear how you think the event was, and also I can pass any feedback on that you have for Olivia to her. So on the 25th of March, we have the Venture Catalyst Challenge Final. So this is one of our flagship programs. It's currently underway at the moment. And so as I say, the final is on the 25th of March. So I'm just going to ask Corey to put the link into the page so you can register for VCC now. So if you'd like to come to attend the final, it's going to be 5 teams pitching for a total of £20,000. And yeah, so the registration is open for that, and it would be great to see as many of you there as possible.
And we have our final talk of the How To series next week. So this is How to Secure Your Data with Olivia Said, and that is going to be on Thursday, the 25th of February at 1 o'clock once again. So if you're interested in coming along to this, the link for that will be in the chat now. Thank you very much for coming along today and for all your questions, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.